Man, you guys can be seated. Welcome everyone to Willio River Church. Glad to have you all here this morning. We're continuing our series in the book of Luke with good news, great joy. Very much a Christmas message that we get to see kind of reverberate through the coming year as we continue on in this text of Luke. The idea of the good news of great joy. We just sang, I love that tag at the end there, I love you, Lord. To be able to sing that great joy back to God is such a beautiful, it's meaningful to me. I think there's something so sweet when we can let down our own guards and just have that moment to be with Christ and share with Him the sweetness of what He has provided every one of us in this time of our life. This morning we're in a text out of Luke 2, finishing up this chapter with the one and only spot we get of Christ when He is a young child. I think this passage is particularly interesting because of how little we have of that season of life in Jesus' life. But this morning we're talking about something, as you see on the slide, that is often a dirty word, submission, something people don't often like to think about or hear about or talk about, and oftentimes has been used in improper ways. So my hope, through seeing how Jesus responds as a child, we can understand a little bit on what healthy or selfless submission looks like. I promise that word is not as bad as it's often led out to be. The result of a submission is discipleship. The result of submission is a healthy relationship. The result of submission is often joy and love and the fruits of the Spirit that we see in our lives when it is done in a reciprocal and a perfect way. What comes from that is really healthy fruit. And so we're going to start by reading a little bit of the context here before we get into kind of the meat of the text. So I'm reading chapter 2, verses 39 through 46. We'll talk about it, and then we'll get into a little bit of the application. Verse 39 says this: "And when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee, into their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom and the favor of God who was upon them. So now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he, Jesus, was 12 years old, they went up according to this custom. And when the feast had ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, and his parents did not know it. But supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But when they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances, and when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem, searching for him. And after 3 days, they found him in the temple." And I just want to pause there for a minute, because I think this context here is so interesting. Like I said, we get very little moments of Jesus when he's a child, when he's 12 years old. This would be the moment right before he kind of enters into maturity. If you think of Jewish culture, 13 is when children would have their bar mitzvahs. And this is kind of the moment in which a child enters into adulthood. And so Jesus, being just before that age, is getting invited to come with his parents to the Passover, which is a meal that was taking place, or a ritual that was happening at the temple every year. And so for them, they lived in Nazareth, which meant they were a little bit of a distance away, close to a day and a half's journey to 3 days' journey, depending on how long they're pausing and what that looks like as far as the caravan goes. And so they take this trip every single year. They stop what they're doing, they take vacation days from their work, and they go and they travel to the temple in order to enjoy Passover collectively. So what happened is the group of people from Nazareth that were of Jewish culture would all take this trip together. Think like Oregon Trail style, where they get in the caravans and they all travel this distance together. And so Jesus, being 12 years old, is being invited into this process, assumedly the first time, where he is getting brought by his father, Joseph. And Joseph's kind of showing him the ropes, teaching him what this looks like and what's going to be a part of him now that he is an adult, and that he needs to be thinking about these things as maturity comes along, and what it looks like to be a part of this ritual. And so you can almost just picture Joseph kind of walking Jesus around the temple structure, which is so just hard to fathom when you think of Jesus being the perfect creator and the Father and the God of the universe, being this child, being instructed by his father on what the culture or the customs of the time would have been. And so they would take Jesus around, and he would show him and naturally share with him the story out of Exodus and tell him that the reason that Passover is happening is because of God, and because God had given protection over his chosen people. And so you kind of see this just really interesting perspective where Jesus is learning about, and assumedly probably knew about, but is learning about this process of Passover, and hearing that back in the day, what would have happened is they would have brought a lamb. And what would happen is every family would have a lamb of their properties. And as the kids get older, and on this certain day, what they would have to do is they would have to take this lamb, this mature male lamb that's 1 year old without blemish, and made sure that this lamb had no flaws for 4 days. They would keep it and protect it. And then on the 14th day of the month, when night would come, an angel was to kill the firstborn. And so instead of killing their firstborn, they would slaughter this lamb and paint the blood on the front of their house as a protection so that Jesus knew which kids were his chosen kids. And this is a story of ancient times in Exodus. And so Jesus is hearing this story, knowing full well that one day when he grows up, he would be eliminating this practice by putting it on himself. To thinking of this lamb needing to get to maturity before it could be ready for its sacrifice. And Jesus, at this point in his life, being ready for maturity, knowing the sacrifice that's to come. There's really kind of a powerful perspective that this is the one story we're chosen to be given of Jesus in his young life, knowing that he was preparing to be that lamb one day. And so, but that time is not yet here. It's not the time for that. And so they start to head back home. But what happens is Jesus ends up staying behind at the temple, knowing that this is his first time here. And as we'll see soon, having conversations, they start going back. And it's really, from my understanding and from like kind of stepping into filling in the blanks a little bit here, it seems very likely to be like a Home Alone type scenario. So what happened in these caravans is you would have the women and children up in the front. So all the women and children would be in the front of the caravan, and the men and the adults would be in the back. The boys and the men would be in the back, and they would be the ones helping kind of push the caravan along and doing all the hard work and the labor in order to make sure everything happens. So Jesus, being kind of this perfect age in between being an adult and being a kid, it's natural that the husband would think, oh, well, he's with the wife up in the front, and so he's hanging out with Mary up front. This is his last time to not have to do the hard work. Let him enjoy it, and then she's probably thinking, oh, well, he's getting a head start, and he's with his dad, learning the ropes and learning how to do the hard labor and what's going to come of these new caravans. And so that's more than likely, and again, this isn't scriptural. This is me assuming based on the context, just trying to fill in the blanks a little bit. This is likely how Jesus could have gotten left behind for about a whole day before they realized he was not with them. So that whole day's travel, as they're heading back home, it takes until nighttime when they start setting up camp before they start to realize, oh my gosh, he's not with us. What are we going to do here? And so they start checking with the aunts and the uncles and the cousins and the acquaintances and everyone else within the group to make sure that Jesus was for sure left behind before they felt they needed to head back. I love this perspective, though, of the type of community that was around at this time. If you think of Nazareth being a poor city, but being a group of people that were all of the same culture and custom, having and being forced to rely on each other. A trip like this for Passover would be virtually impossible with just your own family. And so they were forcibly had to rely on each other based on the perspective, the culture they had, based on the money they had, based on the challenges that life provided at this time. It forced them to rely on one another all the more. And I love that perspective. I think as a church, the more we can look like that and have a caravan-style community where we can gather together and do work for one another and help one another out in order to make it to our destinations together. I mean, that's a special thing. That is the beauty of the church, when we can act very much like this and have a caravan community. The men being men in the church and working hard and doing the labor that's needed for the women to be able to be a part, and doing that well, and both sharing in the responsibilities, but doing it with perfect weight and authority. It's really the thing that I hope we can strive to be more like and grow in, is this type of thing. So now we get into the actual application, and so we can talk about this idea of biblical submission in how I think Jesus models this. I think he really does give us a healthy perspective. And so in order to understand that, I think we need to know what biblical submission actually is. The first step of that is that it's teachable. That if we're to be submissive, we have to be willing to be humble in our approach of knowledge and learn that we need to be teachable. The best thing a child can be to their parents is one that listens and responds to the instruction given upon them and learns from their mistakes. It's not just I do this because my parents told me to, but because I've learned and understood through time why this is a valuable thing for me to do. And some people take longer and some people take shorter in order to figure those things out, but to be able to have that teachable spirit. So this is Jesus in verses 46 and 47. It says, after 3 days, they find him in the temple. So 1 day of traveling away, 1 day of traveling back, and then a third day of searching all around the town before they realize that he's actually just been sitting in the temple the whole time. And he was sitting there among the teachers, and he was listening to them, and he was asking them questions. and all who heard him were amazed at his understanding of his answers. And this is really interesting, diving into some of the context at this time of what was happening. So when Passover would occur, everyone in all the cities around would make their travels to make it back, because Passover is a really important and significant event. And so it was worthwhile for them to take the journeys from all the ranging cities in their area to make it to the temple for this time. But when Passover ended and that day was finished, what would often happen is the pastors and the rabbis and the priests would stay back. And they would use this time after Passover to get to talk with one another and converse and debate and share the things that they've been learning. This is their moment of collaboration. If you think about it, they don't have cell phones or the internet or ways to communicate with one another. They're not sending carrier pigeons one way to get answers back and forth. They kind of store it up and keep all of this information and knowledge so that they can finally share it on this annual basis. So if you think about that, you've got the best of the best, right, that are staying around and having these debates and conversations and trying to gain their own understanding and perspective of the word. And now you have Jesus, this 12-year-old boy, sitting amongst all of the pastors and priests and wise kind of sages of this time of biblical knowledge, and he's just sitting there with them. And he's asking questions, and he's trying to learn from them first and pressing them on some of the things that they have been sitting on for the past year, and kind of asking questions that are creating bigger questions that they hadn't even thought of at this time. And then finally, it says that he starts to give answers, and they're all just amazed and humbled by the answers that this 12-year-old boy is able to give. I think that gives us a really big perspective of the wisdom and knowledge that Jesus has. At the beginning of this passage, we see that when he's a boy, before he's 12, that the first verse I read, it says that he was gaining in wisdom and favor. So even in childhood, he was already gaining in that wisdom and favor as time goes on. And then we see that he's now still in this age of continuing to grow in that. So far more when Christ in his adulthood and in his infant or his further future, we can see how just wise God's perspective is versus anything that we can do. As a pastor, my goal and one of my biggest responsibilities is to continue to grow and commit myself to the word, to know it as deeply and as best as I can and understand it to the fullest extent that I can possibly gain. And I want to continue that for my lifetime. But even in that, knowing that I won't hold a candle to Jesus at 12 years old, right? That even child of Jesus had far greater wisdom and favor than I will ever know. And how much more should I be willing to sit and submit myself to him even in those stages? It is amazing. But I love the order that Jesus takes here. I think that really shows us what a teachable nature looks like. It doesn't start with him saying he's just rattling off answer after answer after answer, or just schooling all of them. It says he's just sitting among them. He's not in front of them at a podium or pulpit and having them all sit as he's teaching. He's just among them, just sitting with them, listening, and just being patient and enjoying it. Loving the fact that he gets to learn these things about his Father and know more about himself and enjoy the creation of God's word. That's so special to see his enjoyment in this. It's not that he felt he needed to just instruct. He simply was just getting to enjoy it. That's what we should do with all knowledge. Is we should enjoy that we get to learn. It's a good thing that we get to grow, that we don't have all the answers from the beginning, and that we won't have all the answers at the end of time, but we get to discover new things. And that sense of discovery is so important and impactful. But first he sits among them, he listens to them first, and it says that he simply just asks questions. He's not quick to give his answers. He's simply just asking more questions. And when they say something that maybe doesn't sound right to him, instead of just saying, well, I think you're wrong, or this is why you're wrong, just asking questions to get the conversation moving forward. And then finally it says he answers. I think he's modeling what it looks like to be perfectly teachable, to be submissive in knowledge in those ways. It's kind of what James talks about in James 1:19-21, where it says, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, be slow to speak, be slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. I mean, that is the perspective that he is already giving, a word that hadn't even been written yet. Jesus is already modeling in these days. He's showing how important the word was to him, and the word was the thing that was bringing salvation, that he wasn't getting riled up by these answers or stacking on top of each other in these debates, getting, more flustered and angrier and frustrated. He's simply just asking questions, being slow to speak, and his answers are worthwhile when he gives them. I really Like I said, I think that's modeling teachability well. My hope in this is that we see like submission or submissiveness or submitting is often like in many contexts, like the root of a healthy lifestyle in general. Those that are modeling a teachable perspective through submission are the ones that really go far places. If we think of people that are scholars, it's because they submitted themselves to the knowledge of other people around them in order to grow in their perspective. When you continue to be in school day after day and year after year, gaining PhDs and learning in scientific perspectives and places like that, what you're doing is you're submitting yourself to projects and people and research and everything that has come before you in order to say, hey, maybe there's something new I could bring to the table in this perspective. But it always comes first with learning what has come before them. There's a teachable nature that has to come. It's not arrogance. If you're a teacher in the room, the ones that model this are the students that are actually willing to listen to what the teacher has to say versus just pushing back all the time. Most of the time, yeah, there might be a wrong answer, and there are times as a pastor I'm going to say things that are incorrect and I'm going to slip and something's going to get through the hole. But being able to just sit and listen and understand that is the model space to come from. My wife, she worked in a PT office and talked all the time about like clients that actually are willing to do the homework and learn what they need to do in order to heal are the ones that have the most success. That seems really rudimentary, but it's the reality of it. If we just listen to what's told to us, oftentimes it really does work out pretty well for us. Not always, but oftentimes that perspective is really good. Otherwise, we simply ask questions until we get to that perspective. Proverbs, the book of wisdom, in chapter 19, verse 20 says this. It says, "Listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future." Listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future. We see Jesus continues to grow in wisdom. He grows in favor. He grows in stature. And it's because this is a perspective that he was willing to give even to humans that he knew were flawed. Like that's where it's really impactful when we realize how we don't hold a candle to his perfection, and yet time and time again, he still submitted himself to the imperfect people that held authority in those positions above him. One of my biggest pet peeves in life, the thing that I probably, if I had to say, like, what is the thing that, like, frustrates me the most, it's unsolicited advice. I have a hard time with it. When people love to give unsolicited advice. And in ministry, people love to give unsolicited advice. But there's a reality where, like, I love when collaboration can occur. Collaboration's like my favorite thing, when we can be in this together. But when people just love to give things over without you asking or thinking about them. And this has been convicting to me, so I'm sharing these 2 tips here in a second, because this is a preaching to myself, because that's an area I need to grow in. There's still things we can gain from unsolicited advice. It doesn't only take solicitation in order for us to learn from it. And so I have 2 tips here when it comes to growing in a teachable spirit, because this is a place that I see a hole in myself that I could increase in. The first is to listen to advice, regardless of who it's from or how it's delivered. Oftentimes, advice cannot be delivered in the best way. Sometimes it can be harsh and it can hurt, and you can feel it for days after that. And sometimes it can be when you weren't expecting it or wanting it, or in a place where you're ready to receive it. But all of that, if we're willing to humble ourselves and submit ourselves to being teachable, we could still gain something from it. You can throw out the bones, but keep the meat of what's said. Maybe the delivery wasn't right. Maybe the execution wasn't right. Maybe most of what they said wasn't even right. But there's probably a nugget of something that was worth you hearing in that moment. So throw out the bones, but keep the meat of the fish. Listen to the advice, regardless of who it's from or how it's been delivered. And then secondly, and this helps avoid the unsolicitation part, which is proactively seek out advice, especially from elders and other wise people. The more you can seek it out, the more people don't have to just shove it upon you, right? We need to grow in our humility in those ways. The thing I love about our church, and one thing I've been really excited about that's been unique in our church plant compared to others, is it's not just a group of young people. Like, we're not just young people trying to figure it out and doing it. We've had a variety of age that the Lord has given us since we started here. And the thing that I think we can grow in is, like, thanking God for that and utilizing it to our strengths. The things I've learned the most about parenthood has been from people in this room that are far past the season that I'm trying to figure out. If I was just going about this blindly in our own way, it'd be even more chaos at home than it is now. So we need to grow in being proactive, seeking out advice, especially from elders or wise people. If on hearing specific exhortations, your heart's response is resentment, then it's baseline assumption that you are the exception. then let me suggest that this is not just a very teachable and therefore not the path of gaining wisdom. We need to grow in our teachable nature if we're going to gain wisdom. So the next piece is that we see that Jesus not only was submissive in his teachable nature, but he was also submission in his devotion. Jesus shows us the order of submission by first submitting to his Father. We see that in verses 48 through 50. This is what it says. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And when his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" And they did not understand the sayings that he spoke to them. There's this initial interaction between Jesus and his parents where they're very confused as to why he didn't follow them. And he is very confused as to why they didn't expect him to stay. I mean, they brought him to the temple for the first time as a child, knowing that he is not of Joseph, but he is of God, that an angel gave them this message. Surely he would have heard these stories at this time of who he is and what made Jesus special and why his name is Yahweh and who he has been dedicated to and all of the things that made him particularly special. The wise men that had come to visit him and the shepherds that stopped everything to see him in his tracks as a kid. He surely would have heard these stories and known of who he was to become. So it's funny to see this interaction where both parties are confused. He wasn't doing this out of hiding from them or not wanting to go home. He was doing this because he thought, this is where I need to be. This is my Father's house. I've been brought back to my Father. How good is it that I can sit in my Father's presence and learn and grow and just enjoy the presence that I get from him at this very moment. And I love that her response is she simply they didn't understand. I mean, how much is that of us where we just don't often understand? He says, "Do you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" The way I see it, the whole world has to reconcile with this very phrase right here. Everyone really has to reconcile with the fact that Jesus at some point walked this earth live as a real human being, as a person that is accounted for, that has been recorded, that has been transcribed, that we have evidence of, that walked this world and simply lived. And at some point realized that his true Father was God, that he wasn't just man, but he really was magnificent and spectacular and the God of all of the universe. And so that moment of recognition is something we all have to reconcile with. The belief that is it true when he says this? Do you not know that I must be in my Father's house? Is that something that we're willing to accept? That Jesus was not just man, but really was the Son of God. There's loyalty in this devotion that he has. I think we think of devotion as a form of submission, but really we see it as this kind of model of devotion, of loyalty. Jesus knew where his loyalty stood. It was with God. That he loved his parents, that he submitted to his parents, that he grew under his parents, and he worked for his parents, and he did everything that a child should do in all of those processes, but his devotion, his loyalty was to God, always and forever will be. We see that play out. It's his devotion. Again, I think submission can be a good thing because we see those when somebody is devoted to a craft. That's when we see excellence occur. We think of any of the greatest athletes of all time. Every one of them has the same thing, which is they were devoted to the thing. They might have had an initial baseline skill or something in them that gave them like a tendency to be good at this particular activity. But at the end of the day, it was like devotion to it. It was giving their lives over to that very thing, shooting hoop after hoop after hoop, or whatever it is, just committing themselves in order to be the best of all time. We see that from artists, and you see it from CEOs or the tech billionaires today. All of those people that are just obsessed with the single thing in their lives, fully devoted to it, with nothing else mattering, willing to exchange and give away everything else because their devotion was singular to that very thing, and success and fruit comes from it. So my hope and my encouragement is that if we're biblical submission, if we're seeing what is truly selfless submission, it's not for our own gain. It's not an athlete that's gaining for their own selves. It's not a CEO that's gaining for the kingdom or the empire. It's not the tech billionaire that's creating new things that could be the devise of the world. It could be any of those different things, but it's the submission to God ourselves to say, this is what I want to be devoted to. I want to be truly loyal to one thing, and that is God. My life and everything I do, every decision I make, every day that I walk, every word that I say, everything wants to be out of devotion and loyalty. That's what it looks like for us to have a heart of submission, to follow what Christ does on this deepest level. Matthew 23:37 says this, and you've heard this verse so many times here at Willio. It says, "And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." Jesus is doing this perfectly. Like at 12 years old, he is doing what I can't do for a minute in my life. Like if I'm being truly honest, even in the best moments of fasting and the best moments of prayer and the moments of like singular dedication to God, like there's no way that I can give my heart, my soul, my strength with all of my might over in those places. I'm just still too flawed. Like I have too much humanity in my midst to allow me to do that with a true transparency and humility in the way that I would like to and love to. But Jesus is doing that consistently. There's a reason that the prophets and the sages and the pastors and the priests at this time were marveled at the words that he had to say, because there was a spirit of humility and devotion that he had that they knew they couldn't even grasp yet. And this is him at 12 years old, knowing it's only going to gain. Our discipleship process at Willio is to know, to believe, and obey the work of Jesus Christ. And this is a really good model of seeing what that has been done perfectly and how much more we can look and grow to be and feel just like that. Perfectly. Acts 2:42 says, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to the prayers." That's the new church. That's the church that we are today. That's exactly what devotion should look like. If we're to submit ourselves as disciples, it looks like being devoted and devoting together, corporately, in groups, in small groups, in community groups and missional communities that we have, in our Bible reading